Hello and welcome back to Chillers and Thrillers. I hope you had a great Halloween. My name is Em, and in this podcast, I recount true stories of people's encounters with the strange and unexplained. No comedy, skepticism, or gore, only 100% true spooky tales. Before we get started, I wanted to thank all listeners for recently leaving ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It goes a long way with spreading the podcast to other listeners, and I sincerely appreciate it. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, please leave me a rating, review, or comment. And if you want to hear ad-free episodes or bonus episodes, make sure to check out the Chillers and Thrillers Patreon. In the early 1970s, a quiet neighborhood in Guarulhos, Brazil, became the center of a mystery that would baffle investigators and terrify witnesses. It began, as these things so often do, with small disturbances. A cup sliding across a table, strange knocks in the wall, objects vanishing and reappearing. But soon, the activity escalated into something far more alarming. A poltergeist was said to be tormenting the family, and it would become one of the most famous and well-documented hauntings in Brazilian history. Poltergeists are among the most recorded and debated forms of paranormal activity. The word has become nearly synonymous with hauntings, thanks in part to the chilling 1980s film Poltergeist, which cemented the phenomenon into pop culture. But long before Hollywood, stories like Amityville and the Enfield haunting kept the world asking the same question: what exactly is a poltergeist? The line between a poltergeist haunting and a demonic activity can often blur. Both are marked by unsettling disturbances, foul odors, and at times, physical attacks that leave witnesses shaken and fearful. So what is a poltergeist? The term comes from German folklore, meaning noisy ghost. It describes a mischievous or malevolent spirit that makes its presence known through movement and chaos, objects flying, walls rattling, and doors slamming without cause. Some paranormal theories suggest that poltergeist activity isn't caused by spirits at all, but by psychokinetic energy that bursts forth from living people, often adolescents, during times of stress or emotional turmoil. Whatever the case, I can imagine being haunted by a poltergeist must be absolutely terrifying. And in this episode, I'll be recounting true stories of people who encountered poltergeists. Now, let's not waste any more time. So get comfortable, turn down the lights, and listen in. The Guarulhos Poltergeist, submitted by me. Just a quick note before I get started with this story. This case lasted for almost 10 years. There's a lot of details that I wasn't able to include in this, and it would pretty much have to be a series of episodes just to cover the Guarulhos Poltergeist. I found some great resources, so if you're interested in learning more about it, check out the show notes to see my sources. And I do have a copy of the original book by the Brazilian Institute of Psychobiophysical Research. So if you're interested in checking out a copy, let me know as well, and I'm more than happy to share it. Now on with the story. In 1973, in the town of Guarulhos, São Paulo, Brazil, a young mother found herself trapped in what would become one of the most disturbing and well-documented poltergeist cases in the country's history. What made it even stranger? It seemed this haunting had been intentionally cast upon her. It began when 21-year-old Noemia sat down on her couch and noticed long, vertical slashes across the fabric. She lived with her husband Marcos, their 2 children, and her in-laws. Confused, she asked her son Antonio if he had done it. But his nails were trimmed short, and the children couldn't reach kitchen knives or scissors. Uneasy, Noemia called for her father-in-law, Pedro. When he came to look, he claimed he saw something horrifying. A dark, fur-covered arm reaching out from inside the couch. After that, the attacks began. And they began to center on Noemia. Chairs would rip beneath her as she sat. Curtains shredded themselves. One afternoon, while she was sewing, she felt an icy chill run through her body, and when she turned around, she watched her mattress tear open right before her eyes. Pedro, desperate to help, called 2 neighbors to witness what was happening. A little background: Noemia's husband Marcos was considered very handsome and was older than her, and people often looked down on her, thinking she was seeking attention or exaggerating. But as one of the neighbors questioned Noemia, a dark arm appeared right in front of them, leading the woman to faint on the spot. The family started seeing dark shadows flicker around the house, and soon the activity escalated. One night, stones began pelting the roof, so loud that the family thought someone was attacking them. And when Marcos climbed up onto the roof, he found no one there or around the house, only scattered stones. When this activity occurred again, the family ran out and watched as rocks seemed to appear from thin air and rain down without any visible sources. One night, Noemia awoke to find a dark figure lying in her bed in her husband's place, staring straight at her. When she screamed, Marcos woke with a deep slash across his arm. Soon, the whole family began to be tormented by this entity. Their clothes, bedding, and shoes were all being found torn apart or with deep gashes in them. The story began to spread, even reaching one of São Paulo's local newspapers. The coverage caught attention of the Brazilian Institute of Psychobiophysical Research, or IBPP, a scientific organization founded by engineer Hernani Guimarães Andrade. The IBPP investigated paranormal events from a skeptical, research-based perspective, and what they found here would become one of the most intriguing parts of the case. The family refused to reveal their identities and never sought money or fame. Their damaged home and possessions alone were proof enough that they had nothing to gain by lying. The damage caused far outweighed any monetary benefits that they would get from this case. Investigators for the IBPP ruled out mental illness and fraud. With multiple witnesses and consistent reports, the Guarulhos case stood apart from everything else the IBPP had seen. As the months went on, the disturbances grew worse. Small electrical fires started. The family, being evangelical Christians, would soon turn to their Bible to pray and would find the pages were torn, always on Psalm 91, the passage that speaks of God's protection. Because you have made the Lord your dwelling, no evil shall befall you, for he will command his angels to guard you in all your ways. Then, Marcos found sprigs of rosemary tucked into his pocket, and the family would find it on windowsills. Mutilated frogs turned up near the property. These were signs of witchcraft, specifically practices tied to Umbanda, an Afro-Brazilian spiritual tradition, which I've spoken about previously on the podcast. At this point, Noemia was pregnant with her 3rd child. Fearing for her safety, the family decided to move. Shortly after the birth of her daughter, 2 unfamiliar women showed up to the new house, offering to bless the home. This wasn't something that was part of the family's faith. For somebody to come and bless the home, Noemia and her family would have to speak to somebody in their local church and organize this. These women were strangers. She had never seen them at church. Noemia refused, and she noticed that one of the women was carrying a bag with rosemary. Soon, the haunting spread to the children. Marcos reported that their daughters would sometimes appear different, with hollowed eyes and strange crooked movements, as if they were possessed. Visitors and babysitters at the new house witnessed glass shattering mid-air and objects being thrown by unseen hands. During their daughter Ruth's birthday, the mysterious women returned again, bringing a plate wrapped in foil as a gift. They said they had bought cake for the children and were trying to get the children to come over to try it. Noemi and the family kicked them out. A few days later, after the family returned home from church, they noticed the house reeked of incense. There was no sign of forced entry, yet the kitchen knives had been removed and were found arranged in the shape of the cross beneath the couple's bed. The family became convinced they were targets of a curse, most likely cast by a practitioner of Umbanda, possibly a jealous ex-girlfriend of Marcus. The IBPP continued its investigation, ruling out intruders, hoaxes, and medical explanations such as epilepsy. Researchers believe that the haunting followed a pattern. First, a spell to summon spirits called umuluns. Then, physical markers, like candles and rosemary, are placed around a home to bind the victim. Umuluns are not demons. They are spirits that are emotional and reactive, and lash out when confronted with prayer or scripture. Knowing this and being both spiritually and physically exhausted, Noemi decided that since she seemed to be the epicenter and the starting points of the attacks, only she could end it. When Noemi realized that prayer seemed to drive the evil spirit out, she began praying hard. One night, as she was kneeling to pray, she said the spirit appeared. It looked like a twisted, crooked man with fire coming from his mouth as he shouted horrible things to her. Shaking, she stood up in the dark room, and she knew this was her fight. Angry and determined, Noemi faced the spirit. In Umbanda tradition, it might have been Eshu, the messenger of the Orishas. Orishas are spirits who are connected to the human and spiritual world. Normally, Eshu can be playful, but when ignored or challenged, he turns violent. Noemi knew she could not give in, or her family's suffering would never end. She shouted the words of Psalm 91, while flames shot from Eshu's mouth. A freezing chill swept over her, like her skin was turning to ice. But instead of fear, she felt release. Then, as she later told it, Eshu disappeared. After that night, the strange attacks stopped. News of the family's story continued to spread, but they still refused to monetize from it. Even though they struggled financially, their full names and addresses are still undisclosed to this day. The women were never identified, and years later, parapsychologists still call the Guarulhos case one of the most thoroughly investigated hauntings on record. The CIA even filed parts of the case in its Stargate project, which studied psychic phenomena for military use. These documents were declassified in 2003, the same year Hernani Andrade passed away. Andrade remained haunted by what he'd seen. The force that tormented Noemi's family seemed intelligent and human, and it reacted directly to prayer. Before his death, Andrade warned that if we don't learn how to defend ourselves, these entities could one day find a way to take over human beings entirely. The Bad Thing, submitted by user Dame. When I was about 3 and my brother 1, my parents moved to a cute little townhouse. Somewhat relevant because we were living across the country, my dad went house hunting alone. My mom didn't step foot inside until moving day. My mom is very intuitive, for lack of a better word. I'm not sure about the timelines, but I know we lived in that house until I was 6. I assume all these incidents were fairly spread out, and I know that for the last year, things were pretty quiet. Weird things started to happen almost right away. My parents are sensible people and brushed it off. The coffee grinder would turn on randomly. The microwave timer would always go off without having been set. Small things like that. I remember the fuse was always being blown. Maybe it's because I was so small, but it felt like constantly the power would fizzle out and my dad would have to go into the basement and reset the fuse. My parents brought in an electrician who found nothing wrong. What got my mom's attention was the basement. One morning, her and my dad were sitting around the kitchen table going over the bills, and she mentioned offhand that they had to budget how much tithe to their church. Almost as soon as she mentioned it, the basement door flew open and a gust of cold, icy wind burst through the kitchen. And then the door slammed shut. A few days later, my mom was reading the Bible, and the same thing happened. More contractors came, and none of them found anything. Not the tiniest problem. There was no draft, no faulty wiring, no crooked door frame, nothing. My mom was starting to get nervous and casually asked our next-door neighbor who lived in the house before us. It was a couple, apparently having some financial difficulty. They fought constantly, and eventually, the young man committed suicide in the basement. At some point after that, the spirit or bad energy or whatever went after me. I remember this incredibly clearly. I was standing at the top of the stairs, holding my plastic McDonald's set. The stairs went down into the living room where my mom was reading. I'm about to take the first step down when I felt 2 points of pressure on my back, like someone had their hands on my shoulder blades, and I fell. My mom looked up as I was tumbling down the stairs. She says I barely touched down on the steps. I was ricocheting down, almost flying. I did a full cartwheel in the air 3 times. I remember being absolutely terrified, though not as terrified as my mom, who was convinced I was going to die. Instead, when I came to the floor, I fell right on my butt and started crying. It sounds crazy, but it happened, and I have no idea how I survived or how it happened, but there was absolutely no way I could have fallen like that naturally. At this point, my mom hit her breaking point and went full Italian Catholic. She started sprinkling holy water all over the house, putting up crosses everywhere, saying the rosary out loud every night, and it began to work. By the time we moved, the incidents had slowed to almost nothing. We kept in touch with some of the neighbors, and apparently, nobody stayed in that house for more than a year after us. My parents' experience submitted by user Wild Honey Pie. I thought I'd share some of my parents' many supernatural experiences. The apartment that they lived in was in a rather old building on the main street in town, and when they first moved in, strange poltergeist-like phenomena started happening. The radio in the living room would turn on full volume when everyone was out of town, or the stations would start changing for no reason. Then, the activity got more pronounced. My mom was once sitting in the kitchen reading the paper, and as she was sitting there, she heard a clink and looked over to the dish drying rack to see a plate float over the side of the rack before it slammed itself into the ground. They would leave the room and come back minutes later to find the newspapers ripped to shreds and strewn around the room, or trash covering the flooring. But what really bugged them and caused them to seek the help of a psychic was that the women in the house started to be hugged by an unseen entity. It happened first to my aunt, who was staying over my parents' place for a couple of days. She was in the shower, and all of a sudden, the shower curtain hugged her. It was not blown onto her, and she said she could feel warmth and pressure from it, and that the curtain looked like 2 arms were surrounding her. My mom was in the apartment at the time, but she was painting and not anywhere near the bathroom. Then, a few weeks later, it happened to my mom. She turned her back to the curtain, and it hugged her, just like the way my aunt described. Just a few days later, my mom's female friend, who was staying the weekend, took a shower, and it happened to her as well. All 3 times it happened to women, and though my parents apparently hosted guests frequently, no men ever experienced the shower hug. None of the women felt threatened, but all were, of course, deeply unsettled. So my parents arranged to have a psychic come and conduct a seance in the apartment. The psychic made contact and told my parents that the spirit's name is Betsy and that she died of an illness in the apartment. So my parents started calling out to her when the radio or anything would start happening, and when they used her name, the activity stopped. Things quieted down some, and they had me. I lived in the apartment until I was 3, and what precipitated our move was me seeing the naked lady all the time. I have no memory of this, but I would wake up my parents crying that the naked lady was staring at me in my room. After this happening a few times, my parents moved us to my grandparents' house. The odd thing is that a good friend of theirs moved in after us, but in the 20 years he lived in that apartment, he never had a single strange thing happen to him, his wife, or their son. A Cottage in Sacramento. Submitted by Anonymous. I lived in this tiny patchwork cottage in Sacramento for a few years. The front bedroom, living room, and kitchen were all originally built over 100 years ago. In the expansive backyard, planks of wood covered the now defunct outhouse hole. It was that old. My bedroom and attached half bathroom were at the back of the house, having been built in the 70s and 80s respectively, directly over the boarded-up crawl space beneath the house. The bathroom to my room was a door, followed immediately by 2 carpeted stairs, into a room that was half toilet and sink, half closet. I loved this quirky little house and its unbeatable rent. For the first 2 years living there, funny little things would happen. The manual thermostat, one controlled by moving a bar to correspond with temperature, would reset itself to cold, sometimes almost immediately. Often, doors would open or close by themselves, and items in the kitchen would be askew. The trash lid taken off, pantry items would go missing. Nothing definitive of supernatural activity, but the roommates and I always liked to joke about our ghost cohabitant. The summer after my second year, I suffered a bad breakup on which I blamed the sudden changes in my sleep habit. I began waking up every night at almost exactly 3 a.m. and would have to go pee. I remember groggily sitting on the toilet one such night, lights out, and I suddenly felt so sad. But the sadness felt like it was in the room, not from within me. It was like a fog that filled the bathroom. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a little girl sitting on the steps of the bathroom. I wouldn't have pegged her as any older than 4 years old, with long light hair, and half her face was burnt. She was such a terrifying sight, I quickly exited the bathroom and went back to my bed. But night after night, she was there, sitting on my bathroom steps, staring at me while I peed. Only once did she leave my area of the house. A friend and I were meditating together in the living room, and he suddenly felt her. "What the hell is that?" he asked. "I feel cold. I don't like it." Out of the corner of one eye, I saw her prowling around us like a cat on all 4s. I told my friend she lives in the house and to be nice, and by the time we were done, she was gone. The feeling of sadness she seemed to carry with her quickly cut through my terror and moved me to try to talk to her. "Hey, nice seeing you again. Who are you? What's your name? Where do you come from? Why are you here? Why are you sad?" But she never answered. She would stare or occasionally look around the room, her hair waving slightly. But after a while, I was recovering from my breakup and didn't appreciate being plunged into the sad room with this creepy kid. One night, feeling very tired and cranky, I snapped at her. "Look, I get that you're sad, But you never tell me what you need, and frankly, you're horrifying to look at, and I don't appreciate waking up in the middle of the night to see a dead girl put on her sad look and stare at me. She disappeared immediately. I went back to bed, but minutes later, I felt my bones freeze cold in my hot August bedroom. I opened my eyes and saw her glaring at me from the foot of my bed. I threw the covers over my head, and I felt the covers tense and pull hard. She was pulling them off of me. I held on tighter, and the tension left my blanket, but with a crash. The box fan from my window fell onto the bed. When the cold feeling left, I looked out, and she was gone. I put the fan back and went to sleep. The next night, I apologized for being rude and mean, even though she didn't show up. I told her I'd help her if she told me what she needed, but she rarely showed up after that. The following summer, I decided to move from my weird little house. My roommates, a lovely couple, had become pregnant, and the timing was perfect for me to move out and for them to take my room. After getting all my stuff moved, I returned with a couple of friends to do the final cleaning. My first friend came into the house, walked into my room, and stopped dead in her tracks. "Look at this," she called. I joined her in my doorway as she pointed up at the light fixture. "The light is green. Look at that." And even though the bulb and fixture were the same as they'd always been, a sick green reverberating pallor was cast over the room. We began dusting and vacuuming, and my second friend arrived and went to the bathroom to clean. Moments after closing the door, she flung it back open. "Can you not hear that? There's a child wailing in there." My other friend and I couldn't hear it, but I told them about the little girl. "Did you tell her you were moving? She sounds heartbroken. You have to tell her." I hadn't thought to tell the disembodied, half-charred ghost in my house about my plans. I went into the bathroom, no girl in sight or sound. I sat on the floor and talked to her. Told her I wasn't going to be living there anymore, but that it had been really cool meeting her and that I'd miss her. I told her my roommates were staying and having a baby and to watch over it and be nice. I left one of my earrings as a token for her and left. Weeks later, I came back to the house for the last time to get a pile of mail from the roommates. While we were chatting, I realized I never told them about the girl. "Look, I don't presume what your beliefs are, and I know this sounds crazy, but there's a ghost of a little girl in my old room. You may see her. She's scary to look at, but she's nice as long as you're nice to her. Just say hi and move along with your stuff, and don't move the earring in the bathroom. That's a gift for her and needs to stay in there." The roommates laughed and said that was funny because they definitely were aware of something. She said it tripped her partner not infrequently in the house. "The other night," she said, "my cat was in there and he suddenly came peeling out of your room, full speed, tail fluffed out. He's old and fat and I didn't even know he could move that fast." She said she had looked into the room after the cat ran out, but it was dark, so she only saw her reflection in the window. Then, her reflection switched sides. The Poltergeist Save, submitted by user KJ. When I was 16 in the mid-1990s, I used to run away from my crappy living situation at home and spend weeks-long excursions at my older teenage friends' places. One of these hovelly Xanadu's was my friend Jay's apartment, located at the very top of a mostly empty 5-story complex in an absolutely terrifying high-crime part of the city. The entire building, except the very bottom floor, was vacant, except for Jay. It was a particularly isolating sense of freedom being there, as well as extra creepy. Upon Jay's moving into said dump, we noticed something remarkable right away. This place was undeniably and very obviously haunted. This was made known the very moment I cleared the threshold on moving day. carrying a heavy box of Jay's books. A large, warm hand ran straight up the back of my bare right thigh. I was wearing a skirt, and the sensation of the hand running up the back of my upper thigh turned into a pinch. I froze, of course, and could only think to fretfully call out to Jay, who was in the bedroom inflating a $10 air mattress. Jay, did you just touch me?" He stuck his head out of the room, looked at me like I was insane, and responded, "No." I told him what had happened, and instead of scared, he seemed amused, because it was a silly situation to describe. After this incident, though, there was no end to the weird stuff that routinely compromised an average day in his tiny one-bedroom apartment. Set something down, it would immediately disappear. Walk into a room, the door would slam behind you, only to immediately reopen itself. Ready to force yourself to sleep through the confusion and only slightly amusing terror? Hear the sounds of dishes and cupboards being banged around in the kitchen. One night, Jay's boyfriend stayed over, and the guy woke up the next morning with a stinging red bite mark on his wrist. The teeth marks didn't match his, Jay's, or mine, and we had been the only three there. So it was absolutely no surprise when Jay's house keys went missing. We tore the place apart looking for them, to no avail. It was Christmas Eve, so getting in touch with the apartment office to get a replacement key was not possible. Jay's mom, in the meantime, had invited the two of us over for dinner that night, so we made the decision to just leave the door unlocked this once, so we could go. We won't be long, we reckoned, and headed out bundled up for the walk to Jay's mom's house. We ended up leaving a bit later than expected, about 11 p.m., but the streets were totally isolated by this point due to the holiday and freezing weather. This made it particularly noticeable when we realized we were being followed. The man behind us was making no effort to disclose his action. He came out of absolutely nowhere and stayed behind us, keeping a pace of only about 10 or 9 feet. I looked over at Jay, and this was the first time I realized I've ever seen him scared. The man behind us was easily 6'5", 300 pounds of fat and muscle. If you've ever seen a professional NFL player in real life, he was that size. His black eyes were laser focused on us. A couple of scrawny teenagers in thrift store polyester bell-bottoms. We were clearly poor, so what he must have wanted, I don't know. Something which gave this whole scenario a darker turn. We increased our pace, he increased his pace. We turned a corner, he turned a corner. Unfortunately, every shop or business front we passed was closed, and cell phones were still brick-sized novelties used only by Miami Vice villains or jerks in convertibles. There was literally no one else around except the three of us, lit only by passing Christmas lights. We finally approached the apartment stairs, and we were terrified to go up and announce where we lived to this freak. But we didn't know what else to do but to get inside, lock the door, and maybe call the cops if we had to. We ascend to the first stair landing. He follows. Second floor, third floor. Jay and I are sharing looks of panic as we try and remain calm as he clumps slowly right behind us. Fourth floor, there he is, close enough to reach out and grab us. We get to the apartment door, and the man has stopped and is now just staring at us intently from the landing, waiting as Jay and I stare helplessly at each other for what seemed like an eternity. I discreetly reach to open the door, and it's locked, deadbolted from the inside. I start to sweat and almost scream when Jay decided to knock on the door. I began knocking too and said, as casually, cheerfully as I could to the door, "Hey, it's us, open up." The deadbolt clicked, The man, seeing that there was someone unseen inside the apartment, turns around and walks away. We run inside, slam and lock the door behind us. Pretty sure we push the couch in front of the door as well. We holler out, "Thank you," to the ghost, and laugh nervously at our sudden relief of fear, though still too shaken up to talk about what just happened. The next morning, Jay's keys are mysteriously returned to the bare counter by the door, where he'd always kept them. It did not occur to me until later that had the keys not been missing, this gigantic night stalker would have known that we were there, all alone. And that's all for this episode. If you want to hear more poltergeist stories, make sure to join the Patreon, where in 1 week I'll be releasing the 2nd November bonus episode, which will feature more poltergeist stories. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, make sure to share with your paranormally inclined friends and family. We have 3 episodes left until the end of Season 5. If you have any stories you'd like to submit, make sure to email them to me at chillersandthrillers@gmail.com. Next episode, I'm going to be recounting true stories of mimics and doppelgangers, so I hope you'll join me then. Until then, I hope all you ghouls and ghosts stay safe, and I'll see you soon.